You're listening to the Business for Good podcast, the show where you'll hear inspirational stories about companies making money by solving some of the world's most pressing problems. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and I'm glad you've joined us. Hello, friend. You are listening to episode 143 of the Business for Good podcast. It has been a blast doing weekly episodes for our 10-part series on the state of cultivated meat, but as with all good things, it must come to an end. If you didn't catch the past 10 episodes with leaders in the cultivated meat space, I assure you that you will find it useful. And of course, if you want to read more about the history of cellular agriculture, my book, Clean Meat, is now out in an updated paperback edition that you can get anywhere books are sold. I also want to thank multiple listeners who pointed out an error on my part in our last episode with Bruce Friedrich of the Good Food Institute. In the episode, I noted that Good Meat is the only company currently selling cultivated meat anywhere in the world, in Singapore, but it was pointed out to me by several of you that, in fact, Vow recently began selling its cultivated quail in Singapore also. I always am grateful when anyone offers me constructive criticism, and in this case, multiple listeners made sure I was aware of this error via email, Twitter, and text message. So yes, I get the point. Vow is also selling. My apologies to Vow for the oversight, and my best wishes to them for their continued success. I immediately put a correction on the show notes for that episode, and I'm correcting that error now here as well. Okay, so the Cultivated Meat series dropped new episodes weekly, and now we are going to return to our normally scheduled cadence for new episodes, which means the 1st and 15th of each month. And I'm very excited about this one and think you will be as well. Many listeners of this show will be familiar with precision fermentation, or turning microbes into factories to produce proteins like those proteins that have historically been produced inside of chickens and cows. Think of companies whose founders we've had on in the past, for example, like Perfect Day and the Every Company. But what if instead of using microbes as protein factories and all the associated costs of bioreactors and other capital expenditures, you could simply turn plants into protein factories and make actual animal proteins inside of those plants, which can then be extracted and sold. That is exactly what Israeli startup PoLoPo is doing inside of potatoes. Their first protein, Ovalbumin, or the protein that makes up most of the egg whites protein content. If you pay attention to ingredient decks on food packaging, you've probably noticed that albumin is an ingredient in many foods, often serving to help color and texturize them, as well as serving as a high-quality source of protein. In fact, the global egg albumin market is valued at billions of dollars, with some estimates around $5 billion US and others as much as $30 billion US. Founded in 2022, PoLoPo has already raised a couple million US dollars to scramble that market with real egg proteins, yes, grown inside of potatoes. Since the process is totally animal-free, it should go over easy as a vegan ingredient. But since it is an actual egg protein, those with egg allergies will still want to avoid cracking open a food with PoLoPo's ovalbumin. Okay, in this episode, PoLoPo CEO Maya Sapir-Mir and I chat about her work as a plant biologist, how she teamed up with a vegan scientist to co-found this company, her passion for using bioengineering to help save the planet, and of course, how she plans to use the humble potato to displace some of the need for chickens in our food industry. When it comes to recreating the performance of eggs without chickens, there are many ways to peel that potato. In this case, let Maya tell you why she thinks potatoes are the best way to do it. Maya, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hi, Paul. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Really great to be with you. I have to ask you straight off the bat, you are a plant biologist. A lot of the times you look at these companies that are doing egg replacements, it's like people like Arturo Elizondo from the Every Company, who his life was really as an animal advocate prior to starting it. Josh Tetrick, who is deeply motivated by animal welfare. What's your motivation? You have a PhD in plant biology. I know that you know a colleague of mine, Dr. Moran Farhi, who's also a plant biologist who you worked with years ago. But what's your motivation? Why do you want to replace eggs and why do you want to replace chickens with your egg proteins?
So first and always, it's plants. Plants are such brilliant creature. I don't know how to say it. They are amazing. Since the day I started working with plants, I was fascinated by the opportunity and the benefits that we can get from plants without ruining our world. And this is the first motivation. I can also say that my co-founder, Dr. Aya Lieberman-Aloni, she's also vegan, so the incentive to stop eating animals and stop use animals is also there. But plants are such an amazing thing to work with.
Very cool. Well, I love learning about plants. I've learned a lot about plants from your former colleague, who I just referenced, actually. And as somebody who loves plants, and I'm glad to know, part of your motivation and your co-founders is to protect the planet and animals. But I just want to get to the controversial question right at the front that I always ask people who are plant biologists with. There's no real dispute that animals feel pain. If you cut an animal, there is somebody home who feels pain, right? You can hear the animal screaming. Do you think that's true with plants? If you cut a branch off, say you have a plant behind you, if you cut a branch off of there, do you think there's any form of consciousness in the plant at all that would say, hey, that hurts me? Is there a me who is there?
Wow, that's a huge question.
Indeed.
I don't think so. I do think that they feel, in the sense that if an animal touches the plant, it does change something inside the plant, but it's just like a mechanism to deal with what you have outside of the plant. Plant can't move. They need to do everything they do without moving. So the reactions are there, but I think they are not as we see it in humans or in animals.
Yeah, that would be my thought also. But when I talk to people who know exponentially more about plants than I do, I always like to ask that to see what more informed minds think of myself. So we've gotten in your motivations. I've asked you this unrelated, or I guess tangentially related, question to your business. But let's talk about what you were doing prior. You founded this company only 2 years ago. You've already raised a couple $1 million in pre-seed money. But what were you doing prior to founding this company?
So first, as you mentioned, I have a PhD in plant sciences, and I did my PhD and a postdoc in Volcani Center in a great lab where I fell in love in plants and also met my co-founder Raya. I'm also married. I have 3 kids that I'm raising. My oldest, she's 15 already. So wow, they're really grown up. And after I finished my postdoc, for me, I always knew that I won't stay in the academy. It's not for me to be a researcher, even though I really enjoyed the time in the academy. So the natural way outside of academy way back when I finished my postdoc was to the cannabis industry. And I found myself in a very small cannabis industry company, did the R&D on the volatiles in cannabis, not the cannabinoids. We had a great R&D, but it wasn't the same for me as what I did in the academy in Volcani Center. And all the time I looked for something different. And I also know now that I'm an entrepreneur by heart. So I think that it also was something that I felt that I need to do something with my knowledge, with my expertise, but in the sense of from the business side. When I worked in the cannabis startup, the food tech in Israel just started, and I saw the first steps of the big companies that we see today, like Aleph Farms and Remilk. And it just clicked me really fast for me, and also with me and Raya in many, many conversation and brainstorming that we did, that the opportunity with plants is huge. And back then we had CollPlant that is doing collagen in tobacco, but it was just molecular farming wasn't there yet. We didn't even call it molecular farming. But for us, it was so obvious that this is what we need to do to grow proteins inside plants.
Okay, so let's chat about molecular farming, because a lot of people have heard of precision fermentation, which for the layperson is basically a type of fermentation where you are bioengineering a microorganism to act as a factory to excrete a certain protein that you want. So certain companies, let's say like Perfect Day or the Every Company or Geltor, they essentially take microorganisms, bioengineer them to excrete the protein they want, whether it's a dairy protein, an egg protein, a collagen protein, and so on. And so you can grow actual animal proteins, not things that are similar to or things that are akin to, but actual real animal proteins inside of microorganisms. But in order to do that, you need bioreactors, these big stainless steel fermenters where you have to pay a lot of capital expenditure in order to get the proper environment to do that. And so it costs a lot of money, a lot of capital expenditure associated with doing that. You say that there is a better way by using plants as your factory rather than microorganisms. So tell us about why you think that is better, Maya, and what you're doing about it.
First, you actually said it all. Molecular farming is just like precision fermentation in the sense of the protein that we are producing, but we are doing it in whole plant. For us in PoLoPo, we are doing it in potatoes, that only the tuber, the part that we eat, will accumulate the target protein. So in the sense of what we get, the product itself, it's the same as precision fermentation. But the advantage is that we are not using those big bioreactors, those big machines, those big factories. We just need a field. We are growing in common agriculture. The plants that we know, the plants that we eat, only we do it in order to get the target protein. So in the sense, first, it's a lot more cost effective to grow potatoes. It's really, really cheap. And scale up is also really easy because you only need another field. You don't need to build those big factories.
So you're essentially taking a potato plant, you're bioengineering it so the potato plant is going to contain, in this case, egg proteins. Now, those egg proteins, they're ovalbumin, but there's lots of proteins in an egg, right? So why this one protein? I imagine this does not replace an entire egg. It replaces the albumin that gets used as an ingredient in certain foods, like ice creams and other foods that albumin can go into. So why this one protein as opposed to any other egg protein?
So first, for PoLoPo, egg protein, just the first protein that we are going to produce. The technology around PoLoPo is first and most our super AA platform. Potatoes doesn't contain a lot of proteins at the moment, the regular potatoes. In our potatoes, we're elevating the protein content inside the potatoes. So it's actually a platform to produce proteins.
And what does the super AA stand for? What's AA?
Amino acids. It's like
super
proteins, super amino acids.
And while we're on this topic, what does PoLoPo mean? I tried to find this out online. It wasn't so obvious to me. So I presume the Po is for potato, but LoPo was not clear to me. What's the Lo and the Po for?
So the Po is for here in Hebrew, and LoPo is like not here in Hebrew. So the protein is actually here, but it doesn't originate from here.
All right.
Word. And now that you know that it's potatoes, it's also playing with those.
I'm so glad that I asked because I was trying to figure this out and I didn't see anything in any articles. Okay, so here and not here and your super amino acid platform. Okay, sorry for interrupting you, Maya, but please go on. So you're making a potato that is a platform to grow proteins. In this particular case, this particular egg protein. Why that egg protein? I know you're saying you can do lots of them, but why are you starting with albumin?
So we're starting with the ovalbumin because it's a great protein. It has a great nutritious value. And it's actually the main protein inside eggs, inside the white part of the egg. It can whip, it can glue, it has many functionalities. We believe that together with the background of the potato proteins, we will have a superior product compared to other products that we see in the egg substitutes.
Interesting. So you could not use your albumin to make a omelet or a scrambled egg. You could use it as an ingredient in an ice cream or a baked good or other things that use albumin as a functional ingredient. Is that right?
True. This is also the scope of the company. We're a B2B ingredient company. Our product is a functional protein powder that goes into specific food applications in the food industry. It's not at the moment for house use as an almond.
Mm-hmm. And how much more expensive is albumin on the market than eggs? So presumably albumin as an ingredient, as an isolated ingredient, costs a lot more than an egg does, right? So like, what's the target price to compete on cost with albumin from actual chicken eggs?
So if I'm not mistaken, the price of albumin changes because the price of eggs always going up. But the last time we checked, the price of albumin is around $25 per kilo, $30 per kilo, something like that. From eggs, of course.
Yeah, and how close can you get to that? Like, are you going to be starting at a multiple over that? Or are you starting at close to price parity? How good is the potato at making albumin compared to the chicken?
So of course we will have time until we will get to the scale that will match the price of eggs, of albumin from eggs. But this is the target. We're looking on a lot lower prices than we see in precision fermentation today when producing proteins, even from the start. In all our models, because potatoes are such a resilient crop that has a huge yield per dunam, per land, then we see that it could be cost effective pretty fast.
Interesting. And so how much protein is in one potato here? So I know you're saying proteins typically don't have much protein, but the PoLoPo potato has how much?
So I can't say specifically how much we got to because it's still, still confidential. But I can tell you that we got to a better stage than we thought that we will be in a year from starting. It's always a comparison to the regular potatoes, and we have more than 50% elevated in this compared to wild type when growing. So it's pretty amazing what our team achieved in such a in such a short time.
Yeah. So do you think there's a market for the actual potato, not just as an isolated albumin that you could sell B2B, but for an actual high protein potato? Do you think there's enough? Is 50% protein, 50% increase in protein enough that you could market the actual potatoes as like a higher protein potato?
So first, I'm sure there's a market for that potato. If you will look on the potato proteins, they are also, compared to other plants, they have a great nutritious value and they have a great functionality. And they also are tasteless compared to if we're looking on soy, for example. So it's a great protein as it is. As for eating the potato itself, protein chips, I believe it's amazing. And if we're talking about feeding the growing population, those are the directions that we need to go to. But our potatoes are GMO, fully GMO. And at the moment, the regulation is more tight on this issue. So we're still concentrating on extracting the protein and sell it as a non-GMO product.
Got it. So the potatoes themselves may be a hot potato, regulatorily speaking, you would say. But just to be clear for people who may not comprehend the difference that you were just making, the potato itself is bioengineered. The protein, when extracted from the potato, is not bioengineered. By at least US standards, you can sell that protein without the surrounding potato as a non-GMO product. Is that true in Europe also? If the protein itself is non-GMO, but it came from a GMO plant, does that count as non-GMO in Europe?
So in Europe, it's more strict, and I think that and this issue is also for precision fermentation and all the molecular farming companies. It's not just for molecular farming or only for PoLoPo. It's for all extracted protein from different, also from microorganisms. In Europe, I think it's still novel food first because we're talking on a new food, so it's different regulatory process. And at the moment, we're concentrating on the US market. Because it's more open to grow GMO, to use GMO, and of course to sell those products that are extracted without the DNA inside them, and then they're considered non-GMO derivatives.
Right. So other companies in the space like Perfect Day and Every have essentially filed GRAS notices, or generally recognized as safe notices, with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, claiming that these are biosimilars, right? That this is identical to the proteins that they are growing, and in their case, egg or dairy proteins. Have you filed with FDA, or do you intend to file a biosimilar GRAS notice also?
So we will definitely file a GRAS notice. We are just as they are, as the every year, are also producing egg proteins. Our proteins are identical to the source, and of course, potatoes are GRAS because we eat them already. But we are starting with the USDA. We have also the USDA for growing our potatoes. So we have few steps before we will start with the FDA, but definitely during this year we will start looking into it.
Got it. I know that Moolec just got a USDA approval for their molecularly farmed pig proteins. So they're growing pig proteins inside of soybeans. Now, soy is one of the cheapest things to grow, one of the cheapest forms of protein on the planet. Why not use soybeans? You know, other companies like Moolec, they're using soybeans. There's another Israeli company using lettuce to grow dairy proteins. I believe that there are other companies using soy as well. So why potatoes over any other crop?
So each company has its vision and its goals to achieve. We thought that potatoes, we didn't want to grow our proteins inside the grains like soy. We believe that the most expensive part is to separate the protein from a protein when we are talking on the downstream process. Potato doesn't have a lot of protein in it, and we believe that in this sense it will make our extraction even cheaper. When compared also yield per land, I think that potato beats soy. I think that we get something like, I won't say because I don't want to make a mistake, but I think it's more than 2 times yield per land. It's a huge organ to accumulate protein in it.
Got it. Yield, you mean by grams of product or calories produced? Obviously not by grams of protein, but by yield, are you referring to the volume of the product or just the calories?
The volume of the grains or the potatoes itself. When you're talking on percentage, it's from something that is really big and really it was the weight, so it's still comparable.
Yeah, my colleague who I referenced earlier, Moran, has told me he's regularly referred to potatoes as basically balls of sugar covered in a skin. And, you know, that's maybe not a lot of room for protein in there until now. So that's exciting. Now, in other types of molecular farming, sometimes they're growing the proteins in the leaves of the plant. In your case, you're growing it in the actual potato. Is that just because there's so much room inside the potato that you don't feel the need to grow it in the leaves?
It's also because of the room that we have in a potato, but also because leaves need to do photosynthesis. We want our potatoes to grow regularly. We don't want to affect any of the growth, any of the photosynthesis mechanism of the plant. It was important to us that we will be able to work with the growers that already grow potatoes, to also work with the production lines that already extract starch, for example. So the whole line of production already exists. So this is why we also didn't go to work on leaves. It's also because of the production line, but also because of photosynthesis. Let them grow as they know.
Let them grow as they know. Okay, good slogan. Very good. So how far along are you, Maya? I know you've raised a couple million US. You're obviously growing potatoes, but if a company if somebody listening to this says, hey, I want to try a sample of your product, are you able to send samples out to food companies to try?
So soon we will be able to send some samples. Of course, we are not going to just send them. We are aiming to work together with the ingredient companies or the food manufacturers to do the applications together. We believe that we need also to learn together the functionality and the possibilities with our product. We already have a few achievements. You probably read about our Super AA platform, that we got the first stages of it. We also have some more achievements that we are going to announce soon.
For those who haven't read about your super amino acid program, what are the achievements that you've had with it?
So as I said, the first stage is to elevate the protein content inside the potato. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time. From the moment we start with engineering the plant, we see the results 6 months later. It's a really, really long tail of R&D. But we see the first results, and as I told you before, we see the elevation in the protein content, which means that we also the technology way that we chose was correct to elevate the metabolism inside the plant. Now we have so many other manipulations that we can do in order to make it even accumulate a lot higher.
Exciting. So, companies like some of the ones that we mentioned earlier who are using precision fermentation, it has taken them many, many years and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. And they're still, with the exception of Perfect Day, they're still largely pre-revenue. Maybe there's some modest revenue, but really not much. How quickly do you think that you will be able to scale up your super AA process to have commercial fields of potatoes growing and actually start making a dent in the albumin market, which is a huge market. Globally speaking, it's $5 billion US annually of albumin is sold. So how quickly do you think that you can get to a point where you would actually not just be sending samples, but selling pallets of your albumin protein?
So for PoLoPo and also for every molecular farming company, it will also take time. The R&D stage is as I said, it takes 6 months to start their first plant. You need to do many manipulation. You need to build a very complex line of production. But once we will have this plant and once we will have this line of production, scale up, it's just so fast and easy. We are aiming to start working in the US by 2026. I guess it will be only pilots and probably not fully commercial, but we're aiming to start in the US by 2026.
As you know, there are certain potato companies like McCain Foods and Lamb Weston that have been active in making investments in the alternative protein space. Are you intending to work with them so they can, have their growers growing this, or are you going to go directly to the growers yourself and not work with the big potato companies?
We're still open to every possibility and every opportunity that we will have in this field. Of course, both ways will be brilliant for PoLoPo.
Okay. So with that said, you've raised this money. You're now advancing your technology. You're saying that you want to start pilots in the US in the next 1.5 years or so, which will be in 2026. So presumably it's going to be many years before you are producing commercially. What do you hope to achieve in your research between now and then? So if you're not going to have meaningful revenue for a few years, then what do you hope to achieve? How will you optimize this process that you'll be able to go to investors and say, here's what we're using your money for today?
So first, of course, to build the technology itself, to bring a potato with high amounts of protein, it's a huge, I think, as we talked, or even about protein chips, I think it's huge for many different markets. We're aiming now to start with Ovalbumin, but we are also looking on the potato proteins. They are also interesting in to extract them. This line of production to build or to work with a CMO in the US or to build our line of production in starch companies is also very important.
So, Maya, in your past couple of years of being a CEO for the company, presumably you have learned a lot and you have relied on many resources that have been helpful for you. So if there's somebody who's looking at you and says, wow, I really admire what Maya is doing, I'd like to be more like her, or I'd like to do something that's also going to do some good in the world. Are there any resources that you would recommend for others that they could check out, whether books, speeches, anything else that were helpful for you in your journey?
So the main thing that helped me during this journey is people, mentors, advisors, friends, family, colleagues. The food tech ecosystem here in Israel is very close, and we are good friends, even if we are competitors in different fields. But we are very helpful. I have a very good people that are helping me. I'm using a mentor that I used that I met in an accelerator that I'm still talking to. This is the people side. But when we're talking about resources that we read, newsletters, I read a lot of current affairs about economics, about finance, and actually a really small thing of advice: Google alerts. When something is really interesting and is important to me, I put it in Google alerts. I get everything about it, and you learn a lot from this tool. I think it's simple and brilliant.
Okay, cool. That's good advice. You mentioned how tight-knit the Israeli ecosystem is. We're recording this in May of 2024 when, of course, Israel is at war right now. So how has this impacted you and PoLoPo? I know, we've interviewed other Israeli companies like at Aleph Farms, where they said 15% of their workforce was deployed. Has the October 7th massacre and the war that has ensued affected PoLoPo in any way?
October 7th affected all of us, but luckily for PoLoPo, we were a very small team back then, so no one was recruited, and we weren't affected directly. Of course, we feel it here, but for PoLoPo, because of the stage that we're still continuing in the work and didn't affect directly from the situation. But we wish that the war will over and everything will be better. It's a new time for us to deal with. It's very hard for all of us in Israel.
No doubt. And our thoughts go out to you. Jonathan Berger, who runs The Kitchen, told us on this podcast that one of the effects that the October 7th massacre has had on the entire Israeli ecosystem has been a major reduction in investors flying to Israel. Obviously, it's much harder to get into Israel now than it was prior to October 7th. And he said that there were far fewer investors coming to Israel to meet with startups. Have you found that to be a problem in your fundraising efforts?
Definitely, to meet face to face, it's a lot. It's more effective than to meet on Zoom, and to see this ecosystem here in Israel, it's a lot different than to hear about it from the outside. So definitely, it affected the fundraising. Again, we were lucky enough to close our pre-seed round at the end of 2022. So we got into October 7th with enough runway. So at the moment we are okay. But yes, we feel that. We feel from colleagues of us that are struggling with great, amazing technology that they weren't succeeding in fundraising. It's really hard.
Indeed, the fundraising environment in general is very bad for startups right now, especially in alternative protein. But I would imagine being an Israeli startup would be a unique challenge based on what we're saying here. So hopefully there are prospective investors for you who are at least listening to this episode, and maybe they'll be getting in touch with you, Maya. On that note, let me ask you if there are any companies that you wish existed that don't exist yet. Obviously, you started this company because you wanted to tackle the problem of egg proteins and the unsustainable and inhumane ways in which eggs are produced today. But are there other companies or technologies that you wish existed and you hope somebody listening will pursue?
So maybe not a specific technology, but as I said, we're a GMO company, a huge belief in GMO. I believe that there won't be any food security without GMO. I say it out and loud. And I think that those directions, first from the regulation, but also from startups, I think that we need to think more of regenerative agriculture that will be more effective with GMO, without GMO, that won't ruin our land, that we will be able to use less land and in a more efficient way. Those are the things that I am thinking about, how to really feed the population, not just the rich people, to eat more fruit and vegetables. Those are the things that I'm connected to.
All right. So a very staunchly pro bioengineering point of view coming here. So I'll mention that on a past episode, we had Professor Robert Paulberg, who wrote the really insightful book. It's called Resetting the Table, Straight Talk About the Food That We Grow and Eat. And Professor Paulberg makes a really excellent, in my view, very persuasive case, not only in favor of bioengineering, but a whole variety of other food technologies that are going to be essential to being able to feed the planet without destroying the planet. You're making the case that, we want to be able to not just feed the rich, but also the poor. His point is that if you want to prevent deforesting the rest of the planet, that we have to use more agricultural technology, not less. And I'll link to that in the show notes of this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com. But it's a very interesting book that I recommend called Resetting the Table, which I think, Maya, you might not be persuaded of anything since you are already a believer that he will be preaching to, but you may appreciate the arguments that he's making in the book. So on that note, let me say thank you for all that you're doing. I certainly am rooting hard for your success, Maya, and that of your colleagues at PoLoPo. I hope very much that I get to try a product with your albumin in it sometime soon. That would be a lot of fun. So let me know when we can make that happen. Maybe when Food Tech IL happens, if it happens this upcoming fall, maybe we'll get some samples there.
We really hope to see everyone in Israel really soon. Thank you for the talk. We will definitely let you know when we have the first samples. Thank you so much for this talk.
Very good, Maya. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please let the world know. Leave the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and share the episode with your friends. Who knows? Maybe you'll inspire one of them to be in the business of doing good themselves.